the Department of National Defense is quietly redesigning how Canada prepares for major conflict and national emergencies. This isn't happening through a single announcement, a dramatic press conference, or a bill with a bold name attached to it, like a big, beautiful whatever. It's happening through internal planning documents, policy shifts, and preparatory work that all point in the same direction. Canada is moving towards a modern form of a citizens' army, and this time it isn't just a theoretical discussion. Internal documents obtained by CBC News reveal that DND is actively preparing plans that would allow the Canadian Armed Forces to mobilize hundreds of thousands of reservists and citizen soldiers in the event of a major emergency or conventional conflict. According to Canada's top military leadership, this proposal is a work in progress, but one that could formally be presented to the federal government in the coming months. I think I read something about in the spring. This isn't conscription and it isn't mandatory national service. It isn't about militarizing Canadian society. It's about readiness, resilience, and the uncomfortable reality that Canada no longer has a credible mobilization framework for large-scale emergencies. Before we continue, though, today I promise I'm going to try to talk slowly. I'm wearing my grandpa sweater and my serious glasses to give the video a little bit of gravitas because this is an important one. I'm going to try to contain my hyperactivity. And yeah, I'm Pierre Shields. This is North Amaga. Let me walk you through what DND is actually doing, why it's happening now, and why this matters. The problem DND is trying to solve. The Canadian Armed Forces are short tens of thousands of personnel. Recruitment has been slow, retention has been worse, and training pipelines are backed up. At the same time, operational demands haven't gone down. They've expanded. Canada is expected to contribute to NATO deterrence, maintain a meaningful Arctic presence, modernize NORAD, and defend against cyber threats, and respond to domestic emergencies that are happening more frequently and with greater intensity. All of this is being asked of a force that struggles to generate enough trained people, even in peacetime. It's not a communication problem, and it's not something that can be solved with better ads or larger signing bonuses. It's a structural mismatch between a 20th century military model and 21st century realities. The Department of National Defense knows this, even if political leaders are often reluctant to say it out loud. Where this proposal is coming from. According to CBC's reporting, the push for a renewed mobilization framework traces directly back to the 2024 NATO summit. At that summit, NATO made it clear that member states need to be prepared in one form or another for the possibility of conventional conflict. That message landed hard in Ottawa. Canada hasn't had a serious national mobilization plan in decades. In fact, the last time Canada thought seriously about large-scale mobilization was during the Cold War. Back then, planners assumed that any major conflict would go nuclear very quickly, making long-term mobilization irrelevant. Holy cow, that's frightening. Isn't that scary? That assumption no longer holds. A little bit less scary, I guess. As a result, DND is now starting almost from square one when it comes to planning how Canada would mobilize its population in the event of a major emergency or conflict. This isn't about panic. It's about catching up to a reality that Canada has ignored for far too long. Mea culpa, we really have. What DND is not proposing. Before going any further, it's important to clear away the noise. The Department of National Defense is not proposing conscription. It isn't proposing mandatory national service. It isn't proposing universal military training, and it isn't planning to replace the regular force with a militia. There's no secret law waiting to be introduced that suddenly drafts Canadians into uniform. We wouldn't be able to, we don't have enough uniforms anyway. Those ideas exist in op-eds, social media arguments, and talk radio. They don't exist in the official planning documents that have come to light. What DND is doing is quieter, more incremental, and more pragmatic than that. The scale of what DND is actually planning. This is where the story becomes much more serious, hence the gravitas glasses. Canada currently has a regular force of roughly 68,000, with long-term ambitions to grow that number to around 85,000. The primary reserve sits at about 30,000, and DND would like that to grow to closer to 100,000. But the real focus of the internal documents is something else entirely. DND is examining the creation of a supplemental reserve of roughly 300,000 citizen soldiers, citizen soldiers. Say that fast 10 times. These would not be full-time troops, and they would not resemble the regular forces. They would be lightly trained, partially equipped, and mobilizable. Canadians who could be called upon during major national emergencies or large-scale conflicts. One defense expert described this as the tallest order the Canadian military has faced since the end of the Cold War. It sounds like it, though. The challenge isn't just people. It's uniforms, weapons, equipment, training capacity, and supply chains that are already under strain. This isn't a small adjustment. It's a fundamental rethinking of how Canada generates military mass. The total force concept. The real foundation at the center of this shift is what DND refers to as the total force concept. This isn't a slogan. It's a planning assumption that treats the regular force, the primary reserve, the Canadian Rangers, civilian employees, and future citizen soldiers as a single integrated system. Under this model, defense capability isn't measured only by how many people serve full-time. It's measured by how many trained, reachable, and usable Canadians the country can mobilize when it needs them. That changes how service is understood. Reservists aren't just emergency backups anymore. Civilian skills aren't secondary. Participation in defense can take different forms, at different intensities, and at different points in a person's life. This is the intellectual backbone of Canada's emerging citizens' army, even if the term itself is used carefully. Why the old model is breaking down. Canada's traditional professional force model was built for a different era. It assumed stable careers, affordable housing near bases, long-term service commitments, and deployments that happened occasionally rather than continuously. That world, sadly, doesn't exist anymore. Careers are fragmented, families are often dual income, employers are less flexible, domestic operations are no longer rare. Trying to force everyone into a single full-time, decades-long military career just isn't realistic anymore. And for anybody who is enlisted, thank you for your service. DND's response hasn't been to lower standards or abandon professionalism. It's been to widen the funnel and recognize that defense participation doesn't have to look the same for everyone. I even told my son-in-law I wanted to get involved, and he said, you know, at my age, they might be able to use me as a sandbag, maybe 2 sandbags. Off. I'm sorry to interrupt, but I need to do a quick shameless plug before we continue. This video isn't sponsored by NordVPN, it's sponsored by me. If you're short on time, skip to the next chapter, they'll be down below. A lot of you regularly leave comments like, this channel should have 100,000 subscribers. I gotta tell you, I couldn't agree more, but you know, my modesty stops me from whatever. Thank you so much. It really means a lot, and it really is encouraging. I get from time to time, I'll get haters, but you know, just having the fantastic comments that most people put out, it's just great. Many of you have noticed that YouTube notifications don't always go out to subscribers, and the algorithm isn't, well, it doesn't like me. I don't know why. Apparently, it's not just me. Apparently, there's a whole bunch of, I consider myself a centrist channel, but I guess I'm left-leaning compared to you Americans. Okay, so I'm not here to rage bait or clickbait anybody. I'm just sharing how I understand geopolitics and power structures as I study them. Sometimes I get things right, sometimes not so much. I'm learning in public, and I'm honest about that. And I do appreciate when you correct me without being too nasty, but I get it. I don't, you know, a lot of things we talk about are very, bring about a whole bunch of emotion. So I do understand. I don't want to sound like a pushy YouTuber or like I'm groveling, but that's what I'm going to sound like. If you want to support the channel, the single most helpful thing you can do right now is just share the video. Likes are great. Subscribing is fantastic. Please, if you're not subscribed, that's great. But sharing the videos helps more. It's free and it makes a massive difference. Share it with family, share it with friends, share it with colleagues or association members, share it with people in your community, your faith group, or anyone you think might appreciate a pro-Canada perspective that actually looks past the slogans and all the hype and the, oh my God, the fake news apparently. And ironically, this is weird, the algorithm rewards high shares and strong engagement more than anything else. What it means by strong engagement is people being nasty and writing nasty comments, because the algorithm thinks that if I'm getting a lot of shares and a lot of nasty comments, it's because I'm reaching a new audience. So please share if you can, nasty comments, not so much. Really screwed up world we're living in, I know. If you watch regularly but haven't subscribed yet, please consider doing that too. It's free. This channel reaches more than 120,000 viewers every month, which is wow, I never thought I'd get four. But only about 1,500 people subscribe each month. That gap matters because the algorithm goes to take a look at it as well. I'd love to put more time and energy into deeper research, better production, more frequent videos, talking slower, maybe being a little bit more serious and not saying as many stupid things. But for that to be sustainable, the channel eventually needs to make a basic level of income. I'm not here to make money. I'm just here to, have it pay for my time. If you believe this kind of fact-driven Canadian analysis should exist and grow, sharing is how that actually happens. Again, if it's too much trouble, don't. I'm so grateful that you're watching. I'm so grateful for your comments and your encouragement. I'm so happy that people all around the world are watching my videos. The reason I started doing this is because my kids were betting behind my back on how long it would take me to start ranting on about geopolitics. So I needed an outlet. That outlet is all of you. Thank you so much. Let's get back to the video. Domestic operations are a major driver. Publicly, this discussion is often framed around NATO. Internally, domestic reality is doing much of the pushing. Floods, fires, storms, and infrastructure failures are happening more often. Operation Lentus, once an occasional mission, has become routine. A centralized force flying in from across the country is slow and expensive. A distributed force embedded in communities is faster and more resilient, much smarter too. That's where citizen soldiers start to make sense. People who already live in affected regions don't need to be transported, housed, or acclimatized. When they're trained and organized properly, they can respond immediately. The Canadian Rangers is proof of concept. If you want to see where this model already works, you don't need to look to Europe. You need to look north. Again, thank you for your service. The Canadian Rangers are locally recruited, lightly equipped, and regionally embedded. For years, they were treated as symbolic. That perception is changing. DND is expanding Ranger patrols, investing in better equipment, and assigning broader tasks tied to sovereignty and domestic response. The Rangers answer a question Canada can no longer avoid. How do you defend vast territory without massive permanent forces? You train and equip the people who already live there. The risks DND is quiet about. This plan only works if it's done properly. Employer protections in Canada are weak. Administrative systems are slow. Pay problems are common. Equipment parity isn't guaranteed. If participation expands without fixing those issues, burnout will accelerate and credibility will collapse. A citizens' army can't be built on goodwill alone. It requires legal frameworks, predictable training, modern equipment, and systems that actually work. Respect has to be demonstrated in practice, not just promised in speeches. A direction, not a declaration. Canada's proposed citizens' army isn't a declaration and it isn't a finished plan. It's a direction of travel driven by NATO pressure, domestic reality, and the recognition that Canada hasn't had a real mobilization plan in decades. The blueprint is emerging quietly. Whether it becomes a serious reform or another half-implemented idea will depend on political will, not military imagination. The question isn't whether Canada needs this. The question is whether Canada is willing to follow through once a proposal lands on the government's desk. If you value clear Canadian analysis without slogans or talking points, subscribe to North of MAGA. If this video helped clarify what DND is actually planning, like the video and share it with someone who still thinks it's about conscription or panic. And I'm genuinely interested in hearing from you. Do you think Canada should rebuild a real mobilization framework, or should defense remain the responsibility of a small professional force? Again, I'm pretty sure I know. Let me know in the comments. Thanks for being here, and thanks for supporting independent Canadian analysis. I'm Peter Shields for North of MAGA. Go play outside.